Andy, really appreciate the time and really appreciate the opportunity to sit down together and have this discussion. We've already just been chatting a little bit on some topics that we'll probably cover now.
Yes.
But yeah, once again, really appreciate the opportunity to sit down. So maybe to begin with, you can just give a little bit of a background on yourself, on your career up to date, both academically and professionally.
Yeah, sure. It's great to be here, Ben, and looking forward to this conversation. Right, my background, I studied physiology and psychology at King's, and I flirted with the idea of going into medicine. I didn't, and ended up at British Telecom, BT, almost by accident and design. And I started off at the bottom and over 10 years worked my way up to running the messaging division, which had its own P&L. It's like a business inside BT. And it sort of exposed me to big clients, products, services. How do you build a business within the frame of a larger multinational with some obviously big clients? Working in a large organization like British Telecom can grind the hell out of you, and it's very political, and after a while I thought, well, I've done as much as I can there, time to move on. So I spent a couple of years poached by Arthur D. Little, one of the strategy consultancies, to sort of go upstairs and look at the big picture, mergers and acquisitions, big picture strategy. And then after my time there, I've spent more or less all of my career doing independent consulting across a range of different industries, different public sector, private sector, different sectors, and really focusing on innovation, product, service, strategy, with a golden thread running through that, which is what do we mean by value, and how do we understand that and internalize that into what we do in products and services, and how do we build a business that can speak to that. And in the last 10 years, I found myself back in health. And health is full of opportunities to think in this particular way. And that's taken my thinking even further. Rather than just thinking about product service strategy from an organizational perspective, how do we think about it as an ecosystem, a multitude of actors that are working largely in silos, but now need to start thinking systemically. So that's got me into sort of systemic innovation. To take me up to the present day, I run a program at Imperial, or have been running a program at Imperial on leading systemic innovation in healthcare, and I'm now active in provoking the health system to think bigger and more boldly and in a more visionary way about how we go from silos to systems of health.
Thank you, and it's a very impressive and also very interesting background up until, of course, what you're doing today as well. Just to go back initially to BT and the work that you were conducting there, and I know it was a little while ago, and as you were saying, BT itself, you were leading a P&L, a business unit within a wider organisation, which is quite common, especially within large corporates, and you used the word before, silo. Besides the political challenges, were there challenges in terms of how your business unit, your P&L in this case, was connected to the wider strategy of BT, how you were then able to cascade that down through your particular business unit? What was your experience of that at the time?
Well, in working in the messaging business, it wasn't one of the core revenue streams of BT. It was located in the mobile division, which was the up-and-coming area that's since exploded. And messaging was really the sort of junior partner behind things like paging, remember that? And selling mobile contracts.
Just about.
In healthcare, and with fax machines, they're still alive. But one of the things that I was really looking at in the messaging business is how do we position ourselves as a value-added service to BT's network offerings. So it was a proposition in itself, but it augmented the proposition of one of the bigger revenue streams. So that brought quite an interesting challenge of it's not just running your own track independent, it was how do you work with other parts of the healthcare system, other parts of the British Telecom system to be able to position yourself as a value-added service.
Yes.
So a lot of politics and diplomacy working with other parts of the business. And really taking that story of us not just as an independent service line or business line, but a value-added service to another part of the business, and using that as the story to motivate and encourage the people within the group that I was working on to see what does value look like, what does innovation look like, who are the stakeholders, we've got customers, but we've also got internal customers, and how do we synthesize those needs to find a role for ourselves that can be most successful in the house of BT.
And the term that you keep hitting upon, understandably, is value. And when you think about value, or how does an organization convey value, deliver value to their customers, to their users, to those that they serve, there are traditional ways of thinking about value propositions. So do you compete on price? Do you compete in terms of differentiation? There are a variety of different routes that we can take, but when you think about an organization's value proposition, what value do they deliver to the market? How do you think about and structure that?
Well, this has been a question that I've been fascinated throughout my career, and so I see a lot of organizations looking at value through the lens of the product or service that we offer, and what it then tends to...
As I was just doing.
Yes, which then tends to lead to a way of thinking about the market. How do we fit people onto the product or service that we've got, or how do we persuade them to use our product service? I feel and increasingly seen that isn't a sustainable way of thinking about value creation. It's too myopic, it's too historical, traditional, mechanistic. So I've become very, very interested in sort of down tools. Let's go out and spend time with our customers and let's see what they're trying to do. And a model that I use that I found most valuable for helping us to think about that is jobs to be done. What is the job the customer is trying to get done? Who's trying to do it? What context do they find themselves? What are constraints? What triggers that job? What are the steps on doing that job perfectly? What are the needs on those steps?
There's some fantastic Clay Christensen videos.
Clay Christensen, yes. So drawing on that and then bringing that back and saying, well, how well does our product and service fit that? Holy shit, there's all these gaps here. This represent opportunities to deepen the richness. We speak to what really matters to the customer. And maybe if we only see that we're doing part of a job, the rest of the job may be an opportunity to partner with someone else to provide a more powerful value proposition. Without having done that work, we'll still be pushing the traditional value propositions without really understanding the jobs to be done and how we connect into that. So that's how I see value, customer-driven value informing what we do, not only what we offer, but how we offer it, because as we move more digital and more service, it's also embedded in the ongoing relationship as well as the product.
So it's the dog wagging the tail as opposed to the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah.
Then how does that relate to the world of strategy and strategic thinking? Because of course jobs to be done and understanding value proposition is just one core part of how to think strategically, how to build and execute strategy. And from your experience, is there a big gap between understanding what the jobs to be done are and then going and executing on it? Or is it a simple task? What's your view on that?
No, I think it's huge. And you can think of jobs to be done, and it's often used in a more simplistic way to help us think about a product. But the way I've come to see jobs to be done is a kind of nested set of lenses. So you can look at a meta job to be done, and that's nested in that are sub-jobs that need to be done that may represent where products and services may fit. But what is a customer or an organization, if you've got a B2B customer, what are they trying to do? What's the job they're trying to get done? And once you see that broader frame and unpack that, and you see that multiple customers have similar jobs, what it's pointing to is not just a set of products and services, but how our organization needs to step into and be able to deliver on that job to be done. So it starts to inform purpose, it starts to inform strategy. One of the things I do as a sort of side gig is also chair a lot of customer experience conferences, which is fantastic, so I get to see different industries and what they're trying to do to nurture and cultivate trusted relationships with customers. And what's interesting watching that evolution is that most organizations have a very traditional command and control, siloed, mechanistic, transactional driven frame of running strategy, and they're now realizing that they need to lean in and build trusted relationships, the experience. But in trying to improve the customer experience, a lot of them are essentially putting lipstick on the pig. They're kind of trying to improve some customer journeys and trying to improve a little bit what they do. But then they run up against the fact that they can't scale that more meaningfully back into their organization, because it's asking silos to work together and working across organizational boundaries and asking people to step out of their silo strategies into a whole systems approach, which then runs counter to how organizations are structured and run. So to really speak to value, it calls upon almost doing service design on the entire organization, not just for products and services, but how we, on a continual, ongoing basis, sense into, understand, respond to emerging needs that people have around these meta jobs. And one of the key advantages of being able to do that well is that understanding where value is and what we need to do to step into that as an organization also starts to inform us, how can we use things like blockchain? Where does generative AI fit on that? Where does our partnerships and supply chain, how can they be mobilized to step into and speak to that? So I see this as a very powerful way, not just thinking about products and services, but also thinking about the ultimate purpose of an organization and how we rally the stakeholders around in a more systemic way to address that.
And what's really interesting, or at least to me, hearing you speak about that, is we're speaking about a few different topics. On the one hand, there are the challenges of understanding what's our value proposition, how do we implement it in our strategy, how do we go and execute. On the other hand, we're also talking about some quite rapidly advancing technologies, whether it's generative AI, large language models, agentive AI. There's a variety of different things we can speak about there. But actually what sits at the crux, the center point of all of that, which you just touched upon last of all, is the human element. Actually, it comes back to both the organizations, the people, the customers that we're trying to serve, as well as the people internally that we're trying to galvanize, align behind the strategy, align behind what we're ultimately trying to deliver and achieve, because they're the ones who need to implement it, they're the ones who need to execute upon it. So ultimately, no matter what we wrap around it, it comes down to how do we engage with people, both customers and also internally.
Exactly, and being honest about that, really stepping into that, I think is really key. With a lot of organizations faced with trying to maximize performance and drive efficiencies, there's a natural sort of field of thinking and action that drives organizations inexorably towards value extraction. How do we get the most we can out of customers for the minimum amount of cost? And then what we end up doing is not really serving the true interests of the customers and not really serving the true interests of employees. We spin that round and say, well, let's really look at this deeply. What are the jobs? Where's the value creation opportunities? How do we create real, meaningful value for the customers that we serve? That's going to ask us to do things in a slightly different way, be much more deeper into our sensing and curiosity about what people need and how we mobilize our resources to be able to address that. Doing that is, I think, going to be way more sustainable in a changing world. It also motivates employees because we're actually doing something for the good of people, not extracting from people. So mobilizing your internal staff behind something that is meaningfully good for the world and delivers good generates, I think, an energy and a culture and a way of working that I think can be transformative for organizations. And obviously you've got the poster childs of Patagonia and others who have perhaps leading in that way, doing really, really well. And I think they're sort of pointers to where we need to shift our thinking about business and institutions. Value extraction is a broken model and it's driving both individual organizations and us collectively down a dead end. We can talk a little bit more about the poly crisis and the meta crisis, which is the sum total of us doing that at scale. But I think why this is so important, I think at the moment, not only has we got all these crises, but generative AI and other forms of agentic AI are going to come in at pace and scale. And if we simply use these new technologies to double down on old value extraction models, we just drive ourselves collectively to the edge of the cliff faster. So it's almost like a point in history. We really need to think deeply about what is the value we're creating? How do we use that insight to enable us to use these new superpowers in ways that actually generate better outcomes for the customers we serve and the world that we're part of? And I think this is why I feel so passionate about this subject.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think that's also probably why you feel so passionate about healthcare, because I can't think off the top of my head of any other sector which so viscerally connects the value that you deliver with the outcome for, in this case, patients. For others, it would be customers. There you can inextricably see the link.
Yeah.
How was the journey for you from your previous roles into the world of healthcare and value generation and value extraction as well within the healthcare sector?
Well, it was fascinating having accumulated this experience and get this learning to find myself invited to participate in a number of projects in healthcare. And these projects, looking back at them, were almost like an accident. They were sort of a helicopter ride around the health system, from sort of high strategy to right out in the field to across different domains. I'll give you a couple of flavors of the things I did. So when government digital services was spun up about 10 years ago, and each of the government departments had to come up with a digital transformation or digital change strategy, I co-authored the one for the Department of Health. So it was like a helicopter ride around the NHS and how do we start the digital transformation, changing the relationship of the public from analog to digital. So that was
no small task.
No small task. But then on the other side, because I'm fascinated about what does value mean and how does it cash out in the real world with real people. I was out in the field looking and writing reports on the unmet needs of diabetics for a pharma company, the unmet needs of mental health patients for the NHS Confed, the unmet needs of people flowing through hospital processes. So what is it really like to be someone who's suffering, facing this healthcare service? And my God, did you see the gaps and the holes and everything? I also did some work in public health. I was helicoptered into Bupa to be their head of e-health strategy, looking at health and well-being at work and care homes. So it really gave me a kind of 360-degree view. And what I saw there was all these people who deeply cared, but were doing very siloed pieces, bits of people's health. But when you go and speak to people, I am one person. My health is something holistic. And now I'm faced with all these silos talking to me about bits of me and bits of my health. They're not talking to each other. And the older and sicker I get and the more things going wrong with me, the more these voices are talking at me that don't connect and join up. So this problem of silos in healthcare is huge. So my understanding of seeing this and my understanding of systems thinking, my understanding of spending time with people looking back at this system going, this isn't going to work. I was fortunate enough to get a fantastic project with the Royal Free, which was, can you look at the big mega trends coming down the road in healthcare? Because we as a hospital system, there's all this stuff being pitched at us and we don't know what's tactical, what's strategic. So can you look at the future, what's happening with genomics, what's happening with personalized medicine, what's happening with all these sensors and diagnostics, measuring all these things. We're going to have exponential data, goes down the road and speak to Google DeepMind and find out what's happening in the future of machine learning, and how do we take this data and put it in service of better care, and how do we share it with people so they understand themselves? What's this all going to look like? And once you've gone and explored all those trends, can you imagine they've all landed at scale? What could 21st century health and care look like in a technology-enabled world? No one had been doing that thinking. Hospitals don't think that far ahead. The government doesn't think that far ahead. The NHS doesn't think that far ahead. So this piece of work called Health Beyond the Fog became a sort of pivotal piece of work that was shared widely around healthcare system and policy circles as a kind of view from the future. What could a third horizon for health look like? And if we can reverse engineer that back to as one of the health ministers said to me, a shit show we got now, what is the transformational journey to that future? So this is condensed and pulled together all my work. So this is what led me now to looking at systemic change and advocating for that based on long-term futures.
And you preempted my next question just as I was thinking about it, because we've spoken a lot now about really big picture thinking and future foresight, what could come down the road, what could impact us, what are the opportunities, what are the threats, and that's fantastic. But like with anything, if we just do that, it's just a really nice academic intellectual exercise. So how do we take that work, how do we take that analysis, those insights, and put it into something which is tangible, something which is usable, something which is impactful for an organisation, be it a hospital like the Royal Free, be it an organisation that works in telecoms. But how do we take that big picture thinking and bring it back to what does it mean for us today? How does it change, or how does it impact what we do today?
So I'll talk a little bit about health, so I've gone more deeply into that, and then perhaps talk more generally about how Three Horizons, I think, as an approach helps us with that. So having done all this work and think about what the future looks like, I was faced looking at this blank sheet of paper, so going, well, how do I talk about the future? Is this like the future of hospitals and the future of GPs and the future of mental health and social service? Is this the future of diabetic care and cancer care? Do I look at it through a disease lens, an institutional lens? How do I think about what this long-term future was? And it wasn't till I stepped back and thought, actually, no, all these things that we've created are legacy institutional ways of trying to address health. The fundamental question we need to go back to basics. What is health? Because a health system has to address health. And if we haven't got a clear definition of health, the system is going to be all over the place because it doesn't know what it's trying to address. So going back and looking at health, and looking at some of the definitions of the World Health Organization, health isn't just sickness. There's also a wellness side to it. There's human thriving and human flourishing. And so what do we mean by health, and what are the factors in health that would enable us to identify which actors do we need to bring to the table who could holds a piece of that story? And when I unpacked health a little bit more, using the help of systems biologists, what you see is health is in some way us. We're a complex adaptive system, so genes express into proteins, into cells, and cells into tissues, and tissues into organs, organs into us. And things can go wrong in there. Most of the time we spot organ diseases like cancer or heart disease or dementia, and then people topple into the health system when they've got severe symptoms and they present. But all of those diseases start upstream as maybe genetic or protein-based or cell-based problems. And what we're seeing now is all the biomarkers that indicate the very beginnings of disease, the ability to measure that, the ability to see there's a problem before the disease becomes established. New forms of intervention, maybe it's behavioral, maybe there's pharmaceuticals. So there's a whole way to hack disease, thinking about cells to the body. But I said, well, it's not just cells to the whole body, it's cells to cities, because we're a complex adaptive system embedded in another one called life. So what family are we born into? What home do we live in? What jobs are we afforded to that gives us the money to live well? What health behaviors do we enact? And what contexts are we put people that make those behaviors more or less likely? Because these are the stressors that then fit back to the body. So cells to cities became a model that I laid out to say, look, health is all of these things. It's what's in us, but it's also what we do in the context we find ourselves in. How do we bring a whole systems view to that? Because in the future, we're going to be having more and more data from all of those pieces. And if we put that together, we'll start for the first time to see the patterns of what happens in people's bodies and what are the relationship with all the things that people do and the things we provide them, and how does that loop back to create. If we've got that model and we've got all the system actors that are working in glorious silos and isolation, now we've got the patterning to be able to see how do we bring these organizations together in ways that allow them to work and orchestrate what they're doing in more holistic ways to speak to the full understanding of this problem. Where's the points of entry that are going to make the most difference to the health of the population? How do we orchestrate collective action around a deeper understanding of the collective problem? So laying out health in that way has been very helpful because it allows me to present to hospitals, GPs, mental health, social services, pharma companies, medtech. So you are all piece of this story. Now you can either go and do your siloed thing, or you have a piece of the jigsaw here. Let's work together on the story. And this starts to reveal where the collaborations might take place that can start to really make a change in healthcare. So this higher order storytelling, this sort of third horizon for the whole system, is enabling me to sort of put forward and now get some traction on organizations that are interested not just on their short-term performance, but how they could play a role in this coming together of a larger health ecosystem of the future.
And what's fascinating is, besides it being just a fascinating topic, is the fact that all of that you've just described isn't merely a great intellectual exercise. It comes back to the core job to be done in this case, which is how do we minimize sickness within human beings and how do we maximize wellness?
Yes.
Ultimately, that's the core job to be done, which is then driven by all of this insight, all of this analysis, all of this research that you've just described to ultimately solve those two big jobs.
Yes. And working with, because for those who are not familiar, the UK healthcare system at the moment is going through another reorganisation and change, but at the moment it has these integrated care systems, 42 of them dotted around the country. that was set up to basically try and bring hospitals, primary care, social care, mental health, local authorities, voluntary sector together in a system to say, how can we go from silos to systems of care for our local population? Because we may have more rural, we may have more inner city, there's different health challenges. How do we work together? So I've been working very closely with Suffolk and North East Essex on that. So one of the segmentations they do underneath that sickness and wellness is this notion of how do we help people start well, live well, age well, die well. So taking a sort of life course approach through sickness and well-being, saying that there are different things that matter if you're having a baby or bringing your child up or in adolescence. There's a whole set of issues that can't be addressed from one silo. We're going to need collective action to help people to start well, to live well, to age well, to die well. So this then becomes a sort of life course way of mobilizing collective action around those different sort of age groups, using sickness and wellness coupled together throughout that journey. And it's been super interesting to frame things in that way, because rather than doing strategy from inside a silo, it's like, here's the story, here's the jobs to be done, that we're all here. Let's use that as the target, the narrative, the vision, the purpose, to then inform how we come together in different configurations and orchestrations.
How we bridge that gap.
And how we bridge that gap. And so we start with a vision, a third horizon. Horizon one is, of course, what we're doing now and the way we're doing it now. And there's things, but if we keep doing what we're doing, we'll keep getting what we're getting. We certainly won't get the betterness. So the third horizon points to a transcendent betterness that invites multiple organizations together. And then the real stuff is horizon two. How do we bridge from all the stuff we're doing today to this new future? That's the transformative innovation, both within organizations and across organizations, was the exciting thing in healthcare.
Look, really appreciate the opportunity to sit down and chat, and I don't want to keep you too much longer, but just as a final question, a final point, what does the future of this industry, of this sector look like for you? We were speaking before about perhaps it's strategic thinking and it's the way in which we implement strategy that needs to actually change, not only within healthcare but globally. Maybe we need to rethink the topic or the question of what is strategy?
Yeah.
What are you thinking, or what do you see now moving forward?
Well, in this conversation, you've seen how I've moved from sort of product to service to organization to ecosystem, and every system sits inside a bigger system. And as I've gone through this, I've been thinking, what is the system that lies even above that? And talking to a lot of people about that. So this is our sort of global planetary system, and we find ourselves in multiple crises at the moment. Some people call it the polycrisis. I prefer the term meta-crisis, which implies that there are some core ways in which we think and act as our modern civilization that cause all these crises. And so what is that we're doing wrong that means that we've got all these crises? And my thoughts on that are, because we are short-term focused, we're quite siloed. You've got silos inside organizations are silos, sectors are silos. We've got silos inside silos inside silos. And because we're short-term and we want to maximize performance, we've created a value extractive model, which is one of my favorite thinkers says, a whale is worth nothing if it's swimming around in the ocean, but if we kill it and turn it into meat, it's worth $100,000. So that way of predating on the world to turn it into money to drive success is leading us inexorably to doing harm. We're extracting in a non-sustainable way from the environment in which we're in, which is going to cause us a disaster. So looking at those problems and those challenges and looking at what's a third horizon for humanity, it's a mixture of three things. It's surely a future worth fighting for and leaving for our children, our children's children. It's got to be a world with human flourishing. If we're screwing each other over and doing each other in, that isn't a world that we really want to bring in. So it's got to be human flourishing. We can't have human flourishing if there's no planetary flourishing. If we destroy the substrate in which the game of life is played on, then we all go down with it. So a future worth having has got to have three things: a relationship between humanity, nature, and technology. Technology being more broadly considered techne, everything we built to further our well-being. So that's not just technology, but it's things like political systems, economic systems, health systems, education systems, global supply systems, energy systems. We have, at the moment, those systems that we've built are become extractive of people and extractive of planet, and we're going to superpower them with AI soon. Our challenge as humanity is how do we bring our techne back in service of a flourishing humanity and a flourishing planet? If we can do that, then we stand a chance. So the question is, if we put our techne or our health service in service of a flourishing humanity and a flourishing planet, what does that mean for the way we think about strategy in healthcare? If we're thinking about education, what does it mean for the way we think? We're thinking about energy, and then, so it's almost like the biggest system of all. In order to maintain its coherence, we need to internalize what we need to do to be in service of that. So strategy needs to absorb these bigger ideas into its framework of thinking to guide us all collectively to some better future.
Well, look, really appreciate the opportunity, as I said, to sit down in a really fascinating conversation, and look forward to speaking further.
Yeah.
Just thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.